Hades.
Of all the gods of ancient Greece, there were few feared more than Hades. The brother of Zeus and Poseidon, Hades was lord of the Underworld, an isolated place where the souls of the dead would reside. But although he ruled the kingdom of the dead along with his wife Persephone, Hades would not command death itself. Instead, that power lay with Thanatos, who would claim the souls of mortals when they died, with Hermes, the messenger god, then guiding the souls to the shores of the underworld. Waiting at the shore would be the eternal ferryman, Charon, who was the only one able to guide the deceased across the deadly River Styx, a giant waterway that separated the earth from the underworld. Only those who had coins placed under their tongue when buried were able to pay Charon's fee, with those who could not afford the journey destined to wander the shores of the River Styx for 100 years before they were allowed to cross. Having traveled along the River Styx, the souls would pass the White Rock before arriving at the giant adamantine gates of the underworld, where Cerberus, the three-headed dog, stood guard, ready to devour intruders or those trying to escape. Resuming their journey and coming ashore, the souls would be directed towards the court of the underworld, where 3 judges would decide their fate. The judges would examine each soul, looking through every action they had made while alive. For those who had not angered the gods, a tranquil place lay before them, but for those who had, an eternity of misery and suffering awaited. After a judgment was reached, the souls would be directed along one of 3 paths, either to the fields of Asphodel, the eternal paradise of Elysium, or to the deepest depths of Hades' realm, Tartarus, a place of scalding fire. The fields of Asphodel were a peaceful place for those who did not achieve anything notable in life, good or evil. It would be here that most souls were sent, and after 1,000 years had passed and their time had finally come to an end, each person would drink from the river Lethe, whose waters would wipe away their memory. Born anew, each soul having forgotten their previous life would be reincarnated and return to the earth, starting the eternal cycle once more. The second path, however, would lead to Elysium, a paradise of eternal bliss, where the souls of heroes, demigods, and especially good mortals would reside. Those sent here were loved by the gods and could experience all of life's pleasures, with parties, feasts, and hunting consuming much of their time. Each soul was given the option to return to Earth, but most would choose to stay and not have to endure once again the hardships of life. Within Elysium, but across the shore, lay the Isle of the Blessed, reserved only for the greatest of heroes, with Helen of Troy, Achilles, and Odysseus all residing there for eternity. The third and last path would lead to Tartarus, the deepest depths of the underworld, reserved only for the worst of criminals and those who had offended the gods. It would be here that Cronus and the other titans would reside, looking on for eternity as new souls enter the realm of the damned. This would be the only place Hades would be involved, with the god himself designing and overseeing each soul's punishment based on their previous crimes. For the Danaides, 49 sisters who had each killed their husbands, Hades forced them to fill a tub with water to cleanse them of their crimes. But as the tub would always leak, they would spend an eternity trying to fill it. Ixion, the first man to murder a family member and who had grown lustful for Zeus's wife, would be bound to a wheel of fire that would spin for the rest of time. Whereas Tantalus, a man who had killed his son and stolen from Zeus, was cursed to eternal hunger and thirst. He would stand in a pool of water with the branches of a fruit tree hanging above him. However, as he went to quench his thirst, the water would recede, and as he went to eat, the branches would rise out of reach, forever leaving him in a state of agony.
Sisyphus. But of all the punishments, the most famous would be given to Sisyphus. Having cheated death multiple times, Sisyphus would pay the ultimate price for tricking the gods. Every day, he was to roll a boulder up a steep hill, only to have it slip from his grasp as he neared the peak. Having to start over again and again, Sisyphus would suffer his punishment for the rest of time. Places of the Underworld. Although Hades would have complete control over the underworld, his realm was so vast that he had to enlist the help of the Furies to carry out his punishments. But they would not only be confined to the realm of the dead. The murder of a family member was considered so terrible in Greek society that even those still alive could not escape Hades' wrath. They would be hunted down and tormented by the Furies, 3 sisters from the Underworld, who would not stop until they had avenged the dead and driven their target insane. It would be the Underworld they called home, resting here before their everlasting torment of the human soul began once again. Traveling across the Underworld would also lay the Fields of Mourning, a resting place for those who had spent their life pursuing love only to be rejected. The anguish they felt would condemn them to this dark and haunting forest, where they would forever mourn the love they never had. In the far corner of the Underworld lay the Land of Dreams, an island accessible only to the gods of Olympus. Ruling over the island would be Morpheus, the god of dreams, who each night, when all were asleep, would alongside his 2 brothers control the dreams of not only mortals but the gods too, either granting them pleasant visions of the future or haunting them with the worst of nightmares. So powerful was Morpheus over the unconscious mind that he would be used to name the drug morphine, a pain medication renowned for sending his users to sleep. The true seat of power, however, did not rest in the Land of Dreams, for the Underworld had only one ruler, the mighty Hades, who lived in a grand palace deep within the earth. Hidden away on an island engulfed by fire, those who searched for his home without an invitation would become lost in the dark and winding halls of the dead. Orpheus. But while the Underworld was filled with punishments, Hades and Persephone were not cruel rulers and would take pity on mortals who found their way to their kingdom. Orpheus, a famed musician and poet, had fallen in love with the beautiful Eurydice. But on their wedding day, Eurydice would be killed by a snakebite, with Orpheus left alone in despair. Grieving and desperate to see his wife once again, he would decide to travel to the Underworld to retrieve her. Arriving at the River Styx, he would take out his lyre and play a beautiful song for Charon, who was so moved that he ferried Orpheus across the water for free. Upon reaching the other side, he would be confronted by Cerberus, with the tune he played so sweet that the 3-headed dog would be lulled into a deep sleep. Finally, he would reach the palace of Hades and Persephone, playing for them a song about his lost love, Eurydice. With tears welling in his eyes, Hades would take pity on Orpheus and agreed to release her soul, but only on the condition that Orpheus refrained from laying his eyes upon her until they were both out of the Underworld. Overjoyed, Orpheus would agree and began to lead his bride through the dark and winding halls of the dead, but as he neared the surface and the daylight shone upon his face, he would be overcome by excitement, turning around to look at his wife. But Orpheus had not yet completed the journey, and so, as his eyes fell upon her, Eurydice would be dragged back down into the realm of death, never to return. It was a lesson to all Greeks in the virtues of patience and restraint, for if Orpheus had resisted temptation when his goal was so close, Eurydice, the love of his life, would have been with him once again. The Age of Heroes. With the gods having established control over the world and the realm of the dead, the heroic age would soon begin, with warriors from across the land embarking on great adventures that would become legend. The House of Cadmus. The first in this generation of heroes would be Cadmus. The brother of Europa, Cadmus would spend many months searching the land for his sister, but as she had been abducted by Zeus, her location would be impossible to find. Desperate for information, Cadmus would make his way to the Oracle of Delphi, but she would inform him that his sister was lost forever and not to dwell on her absence. Instead, she would tell Cadmus the gods had special plans for him and that he was to follow a sacred cow and found a city upon the place where it came to rest. Following the oracle's instructions, Cadmus would find the cow nearby, following it for days into the region of Boeotia, where it would finally lay down to rest. Upon that very spot, he would found the city of Thebes, which would become one of the greatest cities of ancient Greece, rivaling the likes of Athens and Sparta for power and influence. To sanctify the city and receive blessings from the gods, Cadmus intended to sacrifice the sacred cow to Athena, a ceremony that required water from a nearby spring. But when Cadmus sent his companions to collect the water, they would find the spring guarded by a ferocious dragon who slew them as they tried desperately to escape. Hearing screams, Cadmus would run to the spring only to find the dragon devouring his friends. Taking a spear, he would lunge forward and impale the beast, with the dragon unleashing a terrible scream as it took its last and final breath. Little did Cadmus know that the dragon was sacred to Ares, and that by killing it, he had committed a crime against the god of war. Ares would spare his life, but would force Cadmus to serve him as a slave for 8 years before his actions could be forgiven. But for Ares, his troubles would not only be confined to Earth, for on Mount Olympus, Hephaestus, the god of smithing, had discovered one of Ares's deepest secrets. Hephaestus was married to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, but Aphrodite had not been faithful, having an affair with Ares. The romance had lasted many years, with Aphrodite secretly bearing Ares a child called Harmonia. When she came of age and Cadmus had finished his many years of service, Ares was so impressed by his devotion that he would offer his daughter Harmonia to Cadmus as a bride. Hosting a great wedding celebration in Thebes, the two would wed, with all the gods of Olympus happy for their marriage bar one. For Hephaestus, having just found out his wife had had an illegitimate child, would present Harmonia with a cursed wedding gift, a beautiful necklace that would bring misfortune to any family who possessed it. Unaware of the curse the necklace contained, Cadmus and Harmonia would go on to rule the city of Thebes for many years, enjoying a long life and having 5 children together, 4 daughters and 1 son. Yet soon, the curse of Harmonia's necklace would bring ruin to the House of Cadmus. Their youngest daughter, Selene, would be the first to suffer tragedy. Having spent a night with Zeus, Selene would fall pregnant with the god Dionysus, but the cursed necklace would soon bring about misfortune, with Selene bursting into flames when she saw Zeus's true form. Her sister Ino would also suffer misfortune, with her husband Athamas going insane and killing their children, with Ino herself jumping to her death while trying to escape him. The third daughter of Cadmus, Agave, would give birth to a son named Pentheus, who would become the second king of Thebes after Cadmus decided to retire in his old age. But Pentheus would make a deadly mistake, deciding to ban the worship of his divine cousin Dionysus in the city. In revenge, Dionysus would drive all the women of Thebes into a frenzy, who would tear Pentheus limb from limb, with his own mother, Agave, ripping off his head while under Dionysus's spell. And finally, Autonoe, the last daughter of Cadmus and Harmonia, would be mother to the hunter Actaeon, who would be transformed into a deer and devoured by his own hunting dogs after he accidentally saw the goddess Artemis bathing in the forest. With the necklace of Harmonia being passed from generation to generation, the curse of the House of Cadmus would continue, with each new descendant suffering misfortune. However, the necklace's curse would torment one man in particular, Oedipus, the 7th king of Thebes, whose tragic story would bring tears to the eyes of all who heard it.